I hate to say it, but the feminists are at it again. What Muslims need to understand is that feminism is fundamentally anti-family, and therefore feminism is inherently anti-Islam. Here is a recent example. Let me read you this tweet and you try to see how crazy these people really are. The idea that parents should have free autocratic reign over their children to raise them as they wish, quote unquote, is so utterly and terrifyingly absurd and dangerous. Yet so many people don't seem to have any problem with the concept whatsoever. Parenting. So dangerous. Then you have the Middle Eastern feminist adding her 2 cents. She says, parents are terrifying. They have total control and domain over the physical and emotional well-being of small humans. So much terror, fear, and pain is reproduced as a result. So basically, parents are terrorists. Notice how she said small humans and not children. They're literally trying to abolish the concept of childhood. So don't you dare say that you have children. Instead, you should say that you have small humans. And don't even say you have small humans, because that implies ownership. Instead, say that you live with small humans that happen to be biologically related to you. Now let's try to deconstruct this insanity. Let's get into the feminist mind. According to feminists, everyone must be equal, and the whole idea of hierarchy with people at different levels of authority, that is something that is completely against morality. This is why they emphasize being a strong, independent woman. If you are dependent on your family or on your husband, then that puts you in a state where you don't have full freedom. You don't have full autonomy, and therefore you are not truly equal to men. You are not truly equal to others in society. So in order to achieve that equality, everyone has to be strong and independent. This is the basic fundamental premise of feminism. But you can see that this applies equally to children, because children are by their very nature dependent on their parents. And therefore, the child's autonomy is affected, their freedom is affected, and therefore they cannot be equal, even though they're human beings, just like everyone else. So where is the equality? This is a big mission of feminism, to ensure the equality of the small humans. So parenthood is completely contrary to freedom and autonomy and independence. It's contrary to equality. It's contrary to liberation. And this is why feminism has to take this cause. But the natural question is, what is the alternative to parenting? Let's be real for a second. Parenting has been abolished in the modern West a long time ago. Parents really don't have much control over how their children turn out. As soon as children are born, very shortly after, they're sent to daycare centers. Then they spend the majority of their time at public schooling with curricula that's determined by the state. So parents really don't have much say in what their children learn and how their children develop. And even in many European countries, homeschooling is completely banned. So you can't even decide how to educate your own children in the modern liberal West. But even then, that's not enough for these feminists. Parenthood in its entirety has to be abolished. But again, what's the alternative? If we go back to the guy who wrote the original tweet, this is what he has to say. The solution, by the way, is not greater government intervention. God, no. The solution would be a greater erasure of the hard delineation between family and community, releasing parents from the sole burden of parenting, instead sharing the responsibility of child rearing communally. What? Notice the subtle shift there. Now he's talking about the burden, the responsibility. But in the first tweet, he's talking about the autocratic reign, as if parents are exercising this massive control and power for their own benefit over their children, as if they're dictators. Now it's about the responsibility and the burden. But how does this communal option really address the issue of control? Instead of now having two parents who control the children, now you have an entire community that's controlling the children and determining how they live their lives. Instead of just your mama smacking you over the head, now you have so many people who can smack you over the head as a child and tell you how to behave. Now, the ironic thing is that I have no issue with the idea of communally raising children, communally. But what does that mean? When we look at human history, this is in fact what we find in most societies, including Muslim societies. You have large kinship groups where the family structure is very large. You have a lot of aunts, uncles, and cousins that are involved in your life, and they're all involved with raising children, educating children, and basically running the community. This is something that we find throughout history, but that doesn't solve the problem of hierarchy that these feminists have. These communal societies were still very hierarchical and very patriarchal. In fact, they were universally patriarchal, where you have the males within the community making the decisions and having the authority for the most part. This is exactly what the Middle Eastern feminist and all of these other liberal, secular feminists and activists are trying to abolish. The Middle Eastern feminist is presumably from a Middle Eastern society, and these societies are kinship-based. They are communal-based because that's what Islam prescribes, and these feminists have been trying to destroy that. Why? Because they have hierarchy. These communities are patriarchal. There are levels of authority. People have dependence. It's not this kind of flat equality that feminism has been proposing. So this communal structure doesn't solve the parenting problem. So what is the feminist solution to the dictatorial nature of parenting? There have been feminists who have written about this problem and proposed their solutions. One prominent example is a lady by the name of Shilamuth Firestone. And what Shilamuth says in her book is that we need to use technology for artificial reproduction. Have children gestate in these artificial wombs. Basically abolish pregnancy completely and have artificial wombs. And when the children are born, have them be raised by a group of adults. And these adults will abide by, best practices that are dictated by some authority, some woke authority basically. And this will result in the most equitable situation for all. And the small humans can be raised without this nasty problem of dependence and hierarchy. Now, is this the kind of future that attracts you? Is this kind of abolishment of family, abolishment of parenting, abolishment of this beautiful relationship between a father and a son, a mother and a daughter? This is what feminists want to destroy. And this is because their fundamental ideology opposes the idea of family in the first place. For most normal people, we can recognize that what the feminists are proposing is really a dystopia. Really, they are proposing the end of humanity. They want to use technology to create this kind of feminist utopia with pure equality. But for the most of us, this is a nightmare. This is something that we couldn't even imagine in our worst nightmares. But this is the basic logic of feminism. This is the basic logic of liberal secularism. Any honest feminist and any honest liberal secular person, if you take this principle of equality and freedom and autonomy to their logical conclusions, this is what you have to be committed to. This technological dystopia that completely abolishes any notion of family, any notion of marriage, any notion of childhood and raising children. All of this has to be abolished if you want to realize the feminist utopia. This is what you have to do to get rid of the terror the horror of parenthood. This is why all rational people have to throw this ideology in the trash. Guys, if you're interested in this type of analysis and you want to know how to break down the modern ideologies of the day, we offer courses that will train you to think like a strong Muslim, how to respond to these kinds of attacks on Islam and the Islamic way of life. If you're interested in this, join Al-Asna Institute today.